Imagine a quiet shore at dusk. The air is warm and carries the salt, tanged breath of the sea. Gentle waves sigh against the sand, a rhythmic whisper that has been speaking for millions of years. The sky turns from gold to a soft lavender, and the first pinpricks of starlight appear, cool and distant. You are lying on a blanket, feeling the earth's slow, steady heartbeat beneath you. Somewhere, a night bird calls, a single clear note that hangs in the air before dissolving into the breeze. The scent of damp sand and old seaweed is a quiet perfume. This is a place where the world feels soft, and time moves slowly, like honey spilling from a jar. And in such a moment, the mind might drift to an ancient story, a tale whispered by a philosopher named Plato, across the vastness of centuries. The story of a great and lost civilization, a place called Atlantis. Let the waves carry you there now, gently, as you settle deeper into rest. Section 1. Plato's account. Long ago, in a land of marble columns and olive groves, a philosopher named Plato walked beneath the Greek sun. He lived in a city of thinkers, where ideas were discussed like shared bread. But Plato heard a story that was not his own. It came from his grandmother's grandfather, a man named Critias, who had heard it from his own grandfather, Dropides. And Dropides had heard it from the great statesman Solon, who traveled to Egypt many years before. Solon, so the tale goes, sat with priests in a city by the Nile, where the records of time were kept on pillars of stone. The priests spoke of a power greater than any known to the Greeks, a mighty island empire that had tried to conquer Athens but was defeated by the sheer virtue of the ancient Athenians. This empire, they said, was called Atlantis. Plato, many years later, wrote this story down. He placed it in two of his dialogues, the Timaeus and the Asterisk Critias. He wrote that the account was true, handed down through generations, and that it described a real place that had existed. The story was not a myth to entertain, but a history to contemplate. He described a civilization that arose from the sea, a people favored by the gods, who built a wonder of the world. And then, in a single terrible day and night, they were gone, swallowed by the ocean. Plato's elegant words are all that remain, a single, shining thread leading back to a lost tapestry. The words themselves are calm, methodical, almost like a ledger of wonders. They speak of concentric rings of land and water, of a central palace glittering with a mysterious metal, of canals and bridges. There is no drama in the telling, only a profound, quiet assertion of what once was. And so, the mystery begins not with a bang, but with a whisper from an ancient scroll. The air in the library of Alexandria, where such scrolls may once have rested, would have been dry and still, scented with papyrus and cedar. The only sound might have been the soft scratch of a reed pen on fresh ink, as a scribe carefully copied Plato's words for another generation. The heat of the Egyptian sun would have pressed against the high windows, painting golden rectangles on the stone floor. Outside, the Nile would have murmured its endless, loopy song, carrying barges laden with grain. But inside, in the quiet company of words, the story of Atlantis was a seed planted in history's soil. A seed that would grow, for millennia, into a forest of questions. Section 2. The Island of Atlantis. So, let us try to picture this island, as Plato described it. He said it was larger than Libya and Asia combined, a measure that sounds less like geography and more like the exaggeration of a dream. Yet in the telling, it is precise. The island itself was the crown of a great mountain range that rose from the sea. At the very peak of this mountain, Poseidon, the god of the sea, had fallen in love with a mortal woman named Plato. For her, he carved a dwelling in the very rock, surrounding it with rings of water and land, like a watery fortress. First, there were 2 rings of land, separated by 3 rings of water. Each of these rings was like a great, circular canal, perfectly round, with a narrow channel connecting them to the sea. The outermost ring was the widest, a broad band of fertile earth stretching for many miles. Inside that was a ring of water, then a narrower ring of land, then another ring of water, and finally, at the very center, the circular island that held the royal palace and the sacred temple. The entire design was a masterpiece of geometry, a bull's eye drawn upon the face of the ocean. The central island was perhaps 5 stades in diameter, about a kilometer. Around it, the first ring of land was 2 stades wide, the second was 3. The canals were each a plethron, or about 30 meters, in width. The canals were deep enough for the largest ships to navigate, and they were spanned by bridges, allowing passage from one ring to another. The outermost ring of land was the agricultural heartland, abundant with fields of grain, vineyards, and pastures. The mountains in the north were rich with timber, and from their slopes flowed fresh, cool streams. The climate was mild, with gentle rains that fell in their season. The air would have been clear and bright, carrying the scent of salt from the sea, the damp green smell of the forests, and the rich perfume of ripening figs and olives. Imagine standing on the outermost shore. Before you, the sea stretches to the horizon, a sheet of brilliant blue under the Greek sun. But here, the sea is tamed. It flows into a broad, calm canal, its surface like hammered glass. You can see the other side, a green band of land with the white walls of a city gleaming in the distance. The air is warm and still, with only the soft lap of water against stone and the distant cry of a seagull. It feels like a place outside of time, a perfect circle of human endeavor resting in the lap of the sea. Section 3. The people of Atlantis. The Atlanteans were a people of strength and wisdom, Plato wrote. They were the descendants of the union between Poseidon and Plato, and so they called themselves the children of the sea god. Their society was structured and harmonious, with clear roles that seemed to have been accepted with a quiet grace. There were farmers who worked the fertile outer rings, their hands stained with soil, their faces turned to the sun. There were herders with flocks of sheep and goats, their bells tinkling softly as they moved between the hills. There were fishermen who knew the moods of the water, who returned with their boats full of glistening silver fish. There were artisans, potters whose wheels hummed a low song, weavers whose looms clicked like gentle insects, metalworkers whose forges glowed red in the evening. Their cities were filled with the sounds of daily life. The clatter of wooden sandals on stone. The murmur of conversation in the market square, where baskets of olives, baskets of figs, baskets of honey-colored cheese were displayed on woven mats. The smell of baking bread from communal ovens, a warm, yeasty scent that mingled with the aroma of roasting meats. Children's laughter would rise and fall like a playful breeze. Dogs might trot lazily in the shade. The air would carry the tang of salt, the rich compost of gardens, the sharp scent of cut herbs. They built their homes of stone and wood, with red clay roofs that sloped gently to catch the winter rains. Gardens were planted with fragrant herbs, rosemary, thyme, mint, that released their perfume when brushed against. In the evenings, oil lamps would flicker in the doorways, casting soft, dancing shadows on the walls. The people were said to be noble in spirit, generous with their plenty, and devoted to the laws handed down from their earliest kings. There was no mention of great conflict among themselves, only a shared purpose in tending their perfect world. It was a civilization that seemed to have found a balance, a gentle rhythm between labor and leisure, between the needs of the individual and the good of the whole. One can almost feel the contentment in the air, a sense that all was as it should be, like the steady ticking of a well-loved clock. Section 4. The Golden Age. For many generations, this harmonious state continued. The Atlanteans lived under a series of kings, 10 in all, who were the direct descendants of Atlas, the eldest son of Poseidon and Plato. These kings ruled not as tyrants, but as stewards, each controlling his own section of the island while united by common laws and a shared devotion to the divine. Their laws were inscribed on pillars of orichalcum, that strange, glowing metal that Plato says was found in the earth of Atlantis, second only to gold in value. The metal had a ruddy, sunlit gleam, as if it held captured fire. The greatest wonder was the Temple of Poseidon, standing in the very center of the central island. It was a magnificent structure, built of white marble quarried from the mountains. Its exterior was adorned with silver, except for the pinnacles, which were covered in gold. Inside the temple stood a colossal statue of Poseidon himself, drawn in a chariot by 6 winged horses. The god was depicted as taming the sea, a fitting symbol for a people who had mastered the waters. The floor of the temple was of orichalcum, so polished that it reflected the light like water. Sacred rituals were performed here, with priests in white robes offering sacrifices and prayers for continued bounty. The air inside would have been cool and still, smelling of burnt cedar and myrrh, with a soft, glowing light emanating from the metal floors. Their engineering was remarkable. The canals were not just for show. They allowed for a network of transport, with barges moving goods from the agricultural rings to the central city. They built sophisticated harbors, with shipyards where vessels of all sizes were constructed. Their roads were paved with stone, and they had developed systems of aqueducts to bring fresh mountain water into the cities. Music and the arts flourished. There were lyre players and flutists, dancers in flowing robes, painters who decorated the walls of public buildings with scenes from their history and mythology. Theirs was a civilization of beauty and order, where the divine principles of wisdom and courage were said to still shine brightly in the hearts of the people. It was a golden age, not of wasteful luxury, but of purposeful creation and peaceful prosperity. The sun seemed to shine a little warmer on Atlantis then, and the moon a little brighter, as if the heavens themselves approved. Section 5. The Quiet Turning. But as the centuries turned, a subtle change began to creep through the perfect circles of Atlantis. Plato writes that the divine portion within them began to grow dim, diluted by mortal admixture. What does this mean? Perhaps it means that as the generations passed, the people became less mindful of the sacred origins of their laws. They began to value the gleaming metal, the towering structures, the impressive display of power, above the quiet virtues of wisdom, moderation, and justice. The easy plenty of the land may have made them complacent. The constant success may have sown the seeds of pride. The 10 kings, who were supposed to rule in harmony, began to feel the pull of ambition. They grew jealous of one another's domains, comparing the yields of their fields, the size of their harbors, the splendor of their palaces. The great law forbidding them from ever taking up arms against one another was still technically in place, but the spirit behind it was fading. They started to surround themselves with more warriors, more elaborate armor, more weapons. The sounds of the forge changed from creating tools and art to forging swords and spearheads. The clang of the blacksmith became a little sharper, a little more urgent. In the markets, you might have heard more boastful talk, less sharing. A farmer might bray about the size of his harvest. A merchant might haggle more fiercely, his eyes sharp with calculation. The simple joy in a task well done began to be replaced by a desire for more land, more recognition, more wealth. The priests in the temple of Poseidon may have felt it in their bones, a restlessness in the air during the sacred rites. The songs they sang lost some of their former clarity. The light on the orichalcum floor seemed a fraction less brilliant. It was not a sudden fall, but a slow, gentle slippage, like a boat drifting from its mooring while all on board are asleep. No alarm bells rang. No one declared that virtue was lost. It was just that the old ways were followed less often. The new ideas of personal gain took root quietly, and the shared purpose that had once bound the rings of the island together began to fray at the edges. The people were still prosperous, their cities still shone in the sun, but the soul of the civilization had grown a little colder, a little more distant from the sea god who had blessed it. And in the quiet of their hearts, a forgetfulness had taken hold. Section 6. The Cataclysm. Plato's account then turns to the end. He says that after this moral decline, Zeus, the king of the gods, gathered the other deities to decide the fate of Atlantis. He resolved to punish them for their loss of virtue. But in the telling, there is no thunderous punishment from a vengeful god. Instead, there is a natural, terrible precision. One night, as the Atlanteans slept in their stone houses, the earth began to tremble. It was not a violent, jerking shake. It was a deep, groaning sigh from the very bedrock beneath the island. A sound more felt than heard, a vibration that rose from the depths. In the markets, pottery rattled on its shelves. In the temples, the orichalcum floors shivered, sending up tiny, shimmering waves of light. In the harbors, the ships at anchor bumped against the wooden piers with a soft, hollow thud. Then came the roar of the sea. The waters of the great canals, usually so calm, began to churn and froth. The sea itself, outside the outer ring, pulled back, receding farther than any living person had ever seen, exposing the strange, slimy rocks of the ocean floor. For a moment, there was a terrible, silent emptiness. And then the water returned. It did not come as a wave, but as a rising tide of immense, unstoppable power. It poured over the outer ring of land, not with a crash, but with a relentless, swallowing hush. The central island, with its glittering palace and temple, began to sink. Stone by stone, column by column, it settled into the depths. The bridges between the rings collapsed into the churning water. The great mountain, the foundation of it all, groaned and sank. There was no screaming crowd, no panicked stampede. Plato says the island disappeared in a single day and night of misfortune. One can imagine the people, awakened by the tremors, stepping out into their courtyards to see the world changing. Perhaps they simply stood, watching in stunned silence as the water rose around their ankles, their knees, their waists. The water was cold, carrying the taste of salt and the deep, ancient cold of the ocean trenches. It entered their homes, quiet and sure, extinguishing their oil lamps with a soft hiss. It lifted the boats from the canals and set them spinning. It covered the fertile fields, the bustling cities, the sacred temple, all with a blanket of dark, deep water. And then, it was over. Where a great island had been, there was only the sea. A smooth, unbroken expanse of water, lapping gently at nothing. The mystery had its beginning in an ending of profound quiet. Section 7. The aftermath and the seed of a story. Only a few survived. Plato says that those who lived on the highest mountains, perhaps shepherds in the northern ranges, escaped the engulfing waters. They would have stood on the rocky peaks, their clothes wet, their animals trembling, and watched their world vanish. The sea, now calm and innocent looking, stretched where their homes had been. The air would have been thick with the smell of salt and wet earth, and a strange, eerie quiet descended, broken only by the calls of bewildered birds and the lapping of water on the newly drowned shore. These survivors were scattered, alone, filled with grief and shock. They carried with them only the memory of what was. And with that memory, they carried the story of the greatness of Atlantis, its harmony, its turning, and its terrible end. They told it to their children, who told it to their children, through generations of wandering and resettlement. The tale became a legend, a warning, a ghost of a past that was too magnificent to be completely forgotten. Centuries passed. The story traveled, as all stories do, on the wind and on the lips of travelers. It made its way to Egypt, a land that prized memory and record. The Egyptian priests, keepers of ancient knowledge, heard the tale from these wandering survivors or from their descendants. They saw in it a parallel to their own history, a story of a powerful civilization destroyed by the gods for its moral failings. They stored the account on their stone pillars, in their holy archives, treating it not as a fable but as a true history of the world before time. And then, many, many years after the island had sunk, a Greek named Solon visited Egypt. He was a lawgiver and a poet, a man curious about the past. He sat with the priests, and they shared their records with him. They told him of Atlantis, of its empire, its defeat by ancient Athens, and its cataclysm. Solon listened, and he carried the story back to Athens, telling it to his family, to Critias's grandfather. It lay dormant, a seed in the soil of Greek thought, until Plato, so many years later, decided to write it down. He gave it a context, a dialogue, and thus preserved it for all the ages that followed. So the mystery was born not from a lack of information, but from a surplus of wonder. We have Plato's words, a clear and careful account. But we have no other independent confirmation. No Egyptian papyrus has been found that tells the same story in the same detail. No inscription on a stone pillar from the lost city itself has ever been recovered. We have only this single, beautiful, frustrating thread. And from that thread, we have woven an entire world of speculation. Section 8. The Long Search. For hundreds of years after Plato's dialogues were written, Atlantis was mostly a philosophical tale, a story used to illustrate points about virtue and governance. But with the Renaissance and the Age of Exploration, the story began to be taken more literally. Scholars looked at the map and wondered, where could such a place have been? The Pillars of Hercules were the Straits of Gibraltar. So Atlantis must have been in the Atlantic Ocean, beyond the known world. In the 1800s, a man named Ignatius Donnelly wrote a book called Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. He argued passionately that Atlantis was a real, advanced civilization that had existed around 10,000 BCE and had influenced all the ancient cultures of the world: Egypt, the Maya, the Indus Valley. He saw patterns in pyramids and myths that he believed were echoes of Atlantean wisdom. His book inspired a flood of speculation. Amateur historians and enthusiasts began to search. They looked at the Azores, a group of volcanic islands in the mid-Atlantic. They looked at the Canary Islands, the Madeira Islands. They looked at the Caribbean, at the Bahamas, at the coast of Spain, at the island of Crete in the Mediterranean. Each suggestion came with its own set of clues and coincidences. But the sea is a vast and patient keeper of secrets. It does not give up its dead easily. Explorers sailed with sounding lines and later with sonar, scanning the ocean floor for signs of artificial structures, straight lines where there should be none, patterns of stones, the ghosts of great canals. Occasionally, intriguing sonar returns would spark excitement. A strange formation on the seafloor near the Azores. A series of straight lines off the coast of Bimini in the Bahamas. But each time, closer examination revealed the hand of nature, underwater rock formations, sand dunes, volcanic activity. The ocean, in its slow, geological way, mimics architecture. It builds its own pyramids of stone, its own concentric ridges. The search became a patient dialogue with the deep, a conversation of beeps and echoes that usually ended in silence. One must imagine the feeling on board these research vessels. The endless, rolling horizon. The constant, gentle pitch of the boat. The smell of diesel and salt spray. The quiet concentration of scientists staring at screens that showed the unseen world below. And then, the disappointment, the shrug, the marking of another location on the map as not Atlantis. Yet the search continues, not with desperation, but with a calm, persistent hope. The mystery itself has become a kind of treasure, more valuable than any sunken gold. It is a riddle that keeps the mind wandering, a gentle puzzle for a drowsy imagination. Section 9. The Modern Reflection. Today, we know so much more about the ancient world. We have excavated the cities of Mesopotamia, the palaces of Crete, the temples of Egypt. We understand the timeline of human history with a precision Plato could never have imagined. And in this light, the story of Atlantis as a literal, advanced civilization that sank in a single day and night 9,000 years before Plato's time, as he dated it, presents difficulties. Archaeology has revealed no trace of such a globally powerful empire from that so-called Neolithic period. The technological and social leaps described, metalworking on a vast scale, monumental engineering, a large navy, do not match what we know of societies from 11,000 years ago. The earliest cities were just then beginning to form. And so, many scholars now see Atlantis not as a lost continent, but as a powerful metaphor. Perhaps Plato invented it whole cloth to make a philosophical point about the dangers of hubris and the decline of virtue. Perhaps he borrowed and exaggerated a much older, fragmentary legend, maybe from the Minoan civilization on Crete, which did suffer a massive volcanic eruption on the nearby island of Thera, Santorini, around 1600 BCE. An event that severely damaged the Minoan navy and may have inspired stories of a sinking land. The Minoans were a Zia power, had beautiful palaces, and their civilization did decline. The timeline is off by millennia, but the imagery of a watery downfall might have persisted in Egyptian or folk memory. But here is the gentle truth. It does not matter, for the purpose of a quiet story, whether Atlantis was real or invented. The mystery is the point. The story of Atlantis endures because it touches something deep in the human heart. It is a story of a golden age, of a fall from grace, and of the ocean's power to erase even the greatest of human works. It is a story that reminds us of our own fragility. We build our great cities of glass and steel. We connect the world with invisible networks. We reach for the stars. And yet, a shift in the Earth's crust, a change in the climate, a slow forgetting of our better natures. Any of these can, in time, turn our wonders into dreams. Atlantis is not a place to be found on a map. It is a mirror. It is the mystery that lives in the space between what we know and what we imagine. Section 10. The Depths of Imagination. Close your eyes now. Let us descend, slowly, into the imagined depths. Imagine the place where the island once was. The water above is a deep, luminous blue, clear and silent. Sunlight filters down in dappled columns, growing dimmer and greener as it goes. The pressure is immense, but gentle, like a weightless blanket. The sandy floor of the ocean is smooth and undisturbed, for this is a place that has been submerged for thousands upon thousands of years. And there, rising from the plain of sand, are shapes. Not natural rocks, but something else. A series of low, rounded mounds, spaced with a regularity that nature rarely achieves. They are covered in coral now, brain coral, staghorn coral, fragile fans of pink and cream. Tropical fish, impossibly bright, flit between the formations. A sea turtle, ancient and wise, drifts past, its flippers moving in slow, deliberate sweeps. The silence is absolute, save for the soft, internal hum of the ocean, a sound felt in the bones more than heard with the ears. One might see the ghostly outline of a great wall, its stones fitted together without mortar, now home to anemones that wave their purple tendrils in the faint current. A broad, straight line on the seafloor, the ghost of a canal, its bed filled with fine silt. The columns of the Temple of Poseidon, if they ever existed, might now be like a forest of stone trunks, draped in kelp that sways in the eternal, gentle movement of the deep. The palace, with its halls and courtyards, is a labyrinth of ruins, navigated by moray eels in the day and by the silent, predatory sweep of a shark's fin at night. There is no terror here, no dread. Only the slow, geological peace of the deep. The city, if it ever was, is no longer a city of men. It has been reclaimed, gently, by the sea. The water does not mourn, it simply holds. It preserves and it transforms. The mystery is not in what was lost, but in what remains. A space in our collective mind. A blank spot on the map that we fill with dreams of grandeur and lessons of humility. The underwater city, whether real or remembered, is the calmest of places. It is still. It is quiet. It is at peace. Section 11. The Living Legend. And so the story of Atlantis has outlived the island itself, if the island ever truly was. It lives now in books and paintings and films. It lives in the names of hotels and spas and submarines. It lives in the quiet wonder of a child hearing the tale for the first time, eyes wide at the thought of a world beneath the waves. It has become a symbol, a word that means a lost paradise, a place of superior achievement that vanished. We speak of the Atlantis of the Sahara when we find an ancient lakebed, or the Atlantis of the forest, for a ruin swallowed by jungle. The name has become a verb for dreaming of what might have been. Plato used it to discuss the ideal state and its corruption. Modern writers use it to explore themes of environmental disaster, technological hubris, or the search for a better world. It is a story that is endlessly flexible because it is empty enough to be filled with whatever the teller needs. It is a blank page upon which each age writes its own anxieties and hopes. In our age of climate change and rising seas, the story feels newly relevant. We watch the ice melt, the storms grow, and we think of Atlantis. But the story, in its original telling, is not a warning about the future. It is a contemplation of the past. It asks us to consider that no matter how great our achievements, they are built on a foundation of virtue, and without that foundation, even the mightiest works will eventually return to the earth, and then to the sea. The mystery is kind. It does not accuse. It simply is. It sits at the bottom of the ocean of our imagination, or perhaps it floats just below the surface of our everyday thoughts. You do not have to solve it. You can simply sit with it, like a smooth stone in your hand, turning it over and over, feeling its cool, familiar weight. The beauty is in the not knowing, in the space that the mystery creates for wonder. It is a story that helps us sleep, because it is a story without an answer, and therefore, without an end. It just is, like the hum of the world in the dark. Section 12. Gentle closing. Now, let us return to the shore at dusk. The waves continue their endless, soothing rhythm against the sand. The sky has deepened to a rich blue, and the first stars are like salt scattered on velvet. The breeze carries the crisp, clean scent of the night air, cool against your skin. The story of Atlantis, like the mist that sometimes rises from the water at dawn, has gently woven itself into the fabric of your rest. It has no more need to be told. It simply exists in the quiet space behind your eyes, a soft, glowing ember of imagination. The world is still. The birds are silent. The only sounds are the whisper of the tide and the slow, steady breath of the earth. You feel heavy and warm, sinking into the blanket, into the bed, into the deep, welcoming dark. The thoughts of concentric rings and sunken cities drift away, like leaves on a calm pond. There is only the present, this perfect moment of non-doing, of being held by the night. Let the story go now. Let it dissolve like sugar in warm tea. There is nothing more to grasp, nothing more to wonder. Just rest. The water is calm. The sky is clear. All is well.